Now I think that we are ready to start. So about the BIM education. So the question is that in a way, even though Leon was saying that we can't predict the future, but in a way, I think that we have to, when we think about the education, we have to try to at least somehow understand what's going to happen, what our students will be needing in the future. So I think that BIM is really fundamentally changing the ways that we are working. And that, of course, means that we have to think about the new teaching paradigm. And I want to start with a very well-known example of what can happen with the technological change. I suppose that many people know that Kodak was the company inventing the digital camera. But the management of the company didn't want to develop it further. First of all, of course, it was very big and clumsy, and the image quality was really poor compared to the film. But the main reason was that they had a golden goose, which was the film. And they predicted that if the digital camera will become more common, it will be killing the film. Which, of course, as we all know, happened. But Kodak was not the company benefiting from that. They actually were bankrupted because of that. And it's of course a paradox that the company who invented the technology wasn't the one that's benefiting from that. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that I believe that we are in a similar situation now in the construction industry, that the change will be very dramatic and very fast. Those people who think that they can continue the business as usual, they will probably be suffering from the situation unless they understand that they have to change their business models and working models in the very near future. Actually, when I was looking at this small study about the attitudes here in Ireland about the BIM, I noticed that for the quantity surveyors, all 8 people that our companies were interviewed, they were against the idea of BIM. I think that the quantity surveys are definitely one of the professions that should be really thinking about how this is affecting, because this is really they still will be needed, but it's a very different business model that they have to have in the future. So my question is that are we educating people for the past or the future? The way that when I started to study architecture in 1970, pen and paper were basically the tools, and of course we were doing a lot of manual work, as we still today do. But when we think about the technological change that has happening around us in the society, is that construction industry is not necessarily the place where the talented young people want to work, because they don't necessarily see the future there. But when we think about what's happening now, it's really that the environment where they will be working in the end of their career will be very different than the environment where we are now. The same way as the environment where I'm now is very different compared to what was the situation there when I started my studies. So we really have to rethink the education. In the UK, we have this BIM Academic Forum where we have been discussing about these changes, what is needed, and developing these different levels of understanding or implementation of the BIM in the teaching paradigm. And I'm not going into the details here, but as you can see, there is this absent, aware, and infused, and then something that is really embedded in the education. I don't think that anybody is really on the level of embedded fully at the moment. I think that the best universities in the world are infusing that. We have some parts of BIM in the teaching, but we haven't been really changing the paradigm the same way as we should be doing. And some of the key findings in the discussions and studies that we have been making in the UK is that, first of all, one of the big problems is upskilling of the staff in the academy. We have lack of people who really have deep understanding about the BIM, and that's of course affecting the education level. If the teachers don't know what they should be teaching, then it's very difficult to believe that the quality would be very good. And of course, the competition of the people who have the BIM skills with the industry is quite tough. There is, in general, lack of competent people. Then BIM is a very important part of the student employability. Even when the construction industry is not doing that well, companies need people who can start using BIM and implement BIM into practices, especially in countries like UK, where the BIM will become mandatory next year. So companies need that. So it's very important skill for the students. And we have to think about the framework of learning and different things that we have been providing to our students. So we have to put the teaching into the industry context and think about what's happening there. And we need really collaboration also between the disciplines. We can't continue the education in silos as we have been doing in the past. And then, of course, we need the understanding, deep understanding of the BIM, as Leon was also saying. But on the other hand, we need also the practical skills that people can apply into their work processes. And one of the biggest challenges at the moment seems to be for the academia is keeping pace with the BIM development in the industry. We are in the inverse situation that at the moment the industry is ahead of the academia. There are very few places where we can say that the university would be on the same level with the best companies in the industry. And of course that is not the situation as it should be. We should be, as traditionally has been, we should be at least on the same level, if not leading the development. And when I think about the architectural education, that's where I'm working, so I'm focusing quite a lot of architecture, is that what are the future skills that we need? To me, it's quite clear that some of the features, like this Venustas, Firmitas, Utilitas, which is basically the foundation of architecture, that doesn't change. We still need that in our education. But sustainability is becoming more and more important. BIM is there, lean construction is there. We have to start understanding the digital design and media. And if architects want to be leading the project, they have to be able to collaborate with others. They have to understand the whole process. And to me, this means that we have to accept the fact that we have specialization also in the architectural education, and of course also the same way in engineering. We need horizontal specialization, like in the medical field, that some people, we need people who understand something about the different aspects of the project and can communicate efficiently with the other participants. But on the other hand, we need also vertical specialization, BIM specialists, lean specialists, sustainability specialists, because the field is just too wide that one person could be covering all the needs that we have for the skills. And this is something relatively new. We have to think about new type of architectural courses. And when I think about establishing something which is specializing on BIM, that is something that it's relatively easy to establish. When I started in the UK a little bit more than 5 years ago in the University of Salford, we established a master program in BIM and integrated design, which became quite popular very, very fast. And that was a relatively easy process. And the same way when I moved to University of Liverpool in the School of Architecture there, it was not very difficult to establish a BIM specialist program. So just as an illustration, that this is the structure that we have in our BIM program, focusing really on the skills that you need if you want to be a BIM strategist or project manager in an integrated BIM environment. As I said, this is easy. The tough part is to really embed the BIM throughout the education, make it as a crucial part of the normal education that we give for the architects and engineers and project managers, quantity surveyors, all the professionals there. To me, this is, however, essential because the environment will be changing. Those students that are now studying, they will be working in the industry for 40 years. To me, it's quite clear that they are not going to work in the paper-based or document-based environment. They are going to work in the model-based environment. And with one of my colleagues, Tuba Kosaturk, we made a couple of years ago a paper about architectural education and BIM. And one of the challenges is that BIM is still developing very fast. So we really have no idea what BIM will be after a few years, and it's very difficult to start embed that into formal education, thinking about the theoretical basis and how that is really affecting the learning process and the teaching processes. So we have to think about that. Then among architects, there is quite a lot of fear that modeling will be killing the creativity. It's nothing new, the same way when I started to use 2D CAD in mid-80s, my colleagues were often criticizing me that you can't do architecture with the computer. And so architects seem to be very conservative about the tools that they are using, even though they can be very creative in their actual design process, but the tools are something what people don't easily accept changes there. So this is one of the challenges in the architectural departments, that how to convince your colleagues about the need to change the teaching paradigm. Also, we do have, of course, our professional values and skills, and when we think about changing the education, what part of that is something that's so valuable that we have to maintain that also in the future. And when we think about education, it's really challenging to think how these new technologies should be embedded, at what stage when we should be thinking about that. Of course, there are examples. For example, this morning before the lunch, we had one presentation from the Dublin Institute of Technology. I think it was a really excellent example of how people have been doing very advanced teaching models already. There are some examples, but in general, these problems are quite big in the universities. And what's happening in many places is what we call in our paper to add and steer. We just take the BIM tools and put that into the traditional way of educating architects. And I'm not at all convinced that that's the right way to do the things, because I said that it's fundamentally changing the work processes and business models. So I think that we should really investigate much deeper what is really needed there. So taking really the approach that we think about cognitive and epistemological and pedagogical dimension of this. I'm not a pedagogue myself. I have been working 24 years as a designer before I moved into the research and development and the BIM field. I'm not claiming that I would be expert on those fields, but I think that we have to involve the people who have deep understanding about the learning and teaching into the processes, to think about how the new media should be really implemented in the processes. So some more practical observations that I have made. It's first of all, one of the big challenges can be that many of the construction-related programs are accredited. So we have to get the approval from some body that is looking at the education content and level. And for example, architectural education is something which is approved on the European level. And when we think about the BIM situation now in Europe, countries are on a very different level. It's very difficult to believe that we would be able to influence these accreditation norms so that every country would be accepting totally new type of concepts at the same time. So this is one of the challenges. Also, even though basically the rules about the accreditation are quite generic, but still it can be so that the people who make the interpretation of those norms can be very strict. And in the worst case, what can happen is that if you change your education, you lose your accreditation. That's, of course, something that the universities can't even think about. That's totally unacceptable risk. We can't do that. And one of the challenges is also that when we think about the current curricula, those are so full of different issues that we can't just add something there. We have to take something away. And it's a fierce situation that your colleagues, if you say that we can leave this out, the colleagues who are teaching that area, they definitely start defending that this is absolutely mandatory for architectural education. You can't take this away. And the same situation with everything that we are teaching. But we have to accept that something must go out if we want to keep the same level of education. We can't just kind of make the architectural education or engineering education longer. So this is quite a big challenge when thinking about how to manage to get the acceptance for the changes which require also removing something. Then one of the challenges is that really thinking about future processes. This slide is from an early BIM project in Finland where we were analyzing the different benefits and problems. This is about the problems. And typically what was biggest problem in the process was that information was provided too late for the decision making. The traditional way of doing things is very document-centric, and we are used to produce the information at a certain point of the process, but it doesn't necessarily work optimally in the BIM environment. But do we know what are the future processes? If we don't, how can we teach them? And this is something that I think we need quite a lot of research also to look at what are the best ways of working. And of course it means that also we have to accept that there must be flexibility, because as Leon was saying, that there is no standard model of working. You can't make a process so that it's fully standardized. Every project is somewhat different. But we have to have the basic understanding about this. What do I need to do my job? What the others need from me to do their job? And I'm claiming that very few, even experienced professionals, know that very well. We are so much thinking through the documents still today. Also, one of the challenges is that the biggest benefits of using BIM come from collaboration. As this kind of research was showing that there is quite significant savings in the change orders when you move from the traditional 2D CAD project into the integrated BIM. This is, of course, when you start thinking about the volume of the construction industry, this is a huge profit if you can do that. This saving about 15% would mean $1.2 trillion on global scale. To achieve that, we have to start collaborating. But we are not teaching collaboration much in the universities. In most cases, not at all. The silos are very strong. The architectural education, different engineering disciplines have barely any collaboration during their studies. And it's not an easy task to embed the collaboration in the education, because in the real project, we know that there are a lot of dependencies between the different tasks. To do something, you need information from the others. And it's very, very important that the students would understand these dependencies. But if you try to implement them into the teaching, it can be very problematic. We did that in one year in Salford University, so that we had a fully collaborative project where we had really the architects and engineers working together. And the end result was that there were very many students that were very unhappy and complaining about that. Mostly because the architect of that group didn't deliver good quality or not at all and on time, and then the engineers couldn't start their work. And they got bad marks because they didn't finish the course. And of course they were unhappy because it was not their fault. We all know that happens in the real world and in a real project. That's what happens when somebody doesn't deliver. But if you do that in the education, it's punishing that student for the rest of their lives because they have those bad marks in their final papers. And we can't do that. You can't accept the situation that you are punishing the whole group from that somebody doesn't deliver. And this is something that somehow we have to simulate the dependencies without the real negative effects. People have to understand that there are consequences if you don't deliver, but really how to remove the real negative effects from the process. Then also one of the challenges is that when should we start teaching collaboration? There is one study that we knew about which was looking at that if you start collaborating immediately in the first year, the problem is that people don't have their professional identity. They don't know what their role in the process should be. On the other hand, if you don't do that at all, they have too strong silo mentality. They think that it's my project, I can do it alone. So what is the right stage? not too early, not too late, so that we get good results of when teaching the collaboration. This is, to me, one of the big challenges that really, I think that we have to really make some research on that what is bringing the best results. And this should be, in my opinion, really global effort in that sense that we should be learning from others, that we don't have to do all the same mistakes in every university. Then also one fundamental thing is that media affects our thinking. Media is not just something that we use to communicate with others. When we think about this building design, let's say 1,000, 2,000 years ago, physical models were very much the way of communicating. Then we started to do drawings, which were originally very illustrative, rather easy to read. But when the copying machines were invented in the late 1800s, the only drawings that we could copy was black ink on a transparent paper. And that was changing the architectural expression totally. And then when we started to use CAD, CAD was imitating this black ink on a transparent paper. And now we are, in a way, moving into the modeling world, in a way back to the roots. Now, of course, the models are not physical models, but virtual models, which is much more flexible way of doing it. But in a way, this is what's happening. But the important part here is that really we are thinking through the media, not just using that to communicate to others. And Dreyfus was studying this. He is claiming that we learn by doing things so that we are actually not only analyzing the things, but we are reacting to the situation. As he was using the comparison that an experienced architect is like a chess player who can identify several situations immediately and make intuitive decisions in that situation. And in the paper, making drawings is important part of that process. And when you then think about that, how we use that, as Fellman has been saying, that we learn to think through the drawings, so that it's part of our thinking process. And this is, of course, something that if we continue to educate people to the drawing process from the beginning, the question is that are we doing some damage actually there? Should we change the way that we start educating people? Because if we continue that way, they have to, in a way, unlearn from the thinking through drawings and start thinking through the models. So my question is really that we should be thinking that should we teach the people to think through the models, because, well, buildings are 3D objects. And then also Heidegger is speaking about this readiness to hand, which means that when you do something, you don't think about the process of doing or the tool. You are thinking about what you are doing, the end result of that. And there is a lot of truth in that if you have to concentrate how to use the software, you can't concentrate on what you are creating. And that is, of course, a big problem. So it should be something that it's really as effortless as using the pen. The computer software should be part of our, I would say, almost like nerve systems. So in a way, the same situation. If you think about playing some instrument, somebody who is playing piano, he or she is definitely not thinking about fingers, which buttons to push. It's really something that comes fully automatically from the process. With computers, we have very often the situation that people really are struggling with using the software. We should be able to move into the level where it's as effortless. We are not thinking what we are doing in the way that how to use the tool, but we are concentrating on what we are trying to achieve by doing that. And that's really something that when we think about the students who are coming to the universities today, they have been growing up with the 3D software. It's nothing new there for them. They have been playing games, all kind of things, all their lives. We are already dealing with these diginatives when speaking about the undergrad programs. And then teachers typically are from different generations. people who are very good in 2D drawings, but very few are really mastering the BIM or even 3D modeling, which is causing a lot of friction, and it's very difficult to start changing the way that we start the teaching process. And when we think about that, why we need drawings? When I was studying architecture, that was the best media. If we wanted to communicate our ideas to other people, paper was the only option that we had. I have sometimes said that if it would be possible to write the buildings, we would have been writing buildings. But you can't describe with the words the buildings. We needed the drawings for that because we didn't have anything better. But these technical drawings are very high level of abstraction. It's a language of its own. And everybody who has been dealing with the customers knows that most customers don't really understand drawings. You have to explain what is in the drawing. And even in the professional team, you have a situation that people have very different skills of building the 3D model in their head from the drawings. And that leads to the situation that the team members have very different understanding of the building and very different understanding of the problems. It's very difficult to communicate about on the same level. So that is something that when thinking, these are, for example, these two drawings, they are from the same building, Helsinki Music Center. I don't think that even if we give several sections from this concert hall to people, most people cannot build the 3D model of such complex space in their heads. And that, of course, means that should we really use the drawings also in the future? Because these different levels of understanding of the documentation leads that the different team members have different understanding, and the end result can be something that we really don't want to do because people misunderstand something. Of course, this is a very extreme example of that kind of a situation, but nevertheless, these things happen. We all know that there are lots of misunderstandings and mistakes in the construction processes. But when we have a model, people are much more on the same page because we are used to look at 3D pictures like photographs, and of course we see the world around us in 3 dimensions. We can also use really the virtual reality and 3D classes, different 3D displays to explain the things. And people get the same understanding, and we are speaking about the same problems when we try to solve them. So I'm really questioning that is 2D drafting an essential part of the architectural education. And some years ago, I was as a judge in a very interesting competition. School kids who were around 12 years old, they were building BIM. And as you can see from the model, it's rather complicated building. They made a school of the future was the task that they were doing. So if somebody says that it's too complicated to teach BIM or 3D modeling in the beginning of the studies, I would really challenge that. If 12-year-old kids can do that in one class in the school, how can you say that the building professionals who start studying in the universities could not do it? To me, that's a ridiculous claim. So when we think about, in most universities, when you start architectural education, we are forcing people to start making 2D drawings. And then, at some point, maybe in the 3rd or 4th year, we start accepting them to use 3D modeling and computers in their work. This is very common still today. And I'm really asking that should we turn it the other way around? Why not start with the modeling and then teach them how to generate the drawings and how to read the drawings? Those will be still important skills for a while. But in the long run, we can, of course, ask that is it something that, let's say, 40 years from now, do we still need drawings? I doubt it, really. I know that this is something that many people really don't believe that this could happen, but I think that it will happen. And the reason is that when we think about these different technologies that are developing, the user interfaces are developing, so we have better devices to show things. And also the production methods are changing. We already have quite a lot of different robots that can be doing buildings, and that's emerging all the time. And then, of course, we can also start 3D printing of the buildings. There are a huge amount of projects at the moment in the world where 3D printing is used. If you 3D print your building, where do you need the drawings? The machines don't need that. And also the building permitting process in many countries is changing at the moment so that the models are directly taken into the permitting process. So the question is really, how long do we need the drawings? I said that I believe that for the next 10, maybe 20 years, we might be needing that. But in the long run, I think that they will disappear. Because if everything is kind of going between the computer and the production machines, who is really needing the drawing in between? The machines definitely don't need that. And then I wanted to conclude my presentation coming to the digital production and creativity, because this is something that I do quite often also with our students, because as said, many architects think that between the modeling and use of computers and creativity, there is some kind of a big gap between those. But when we think about our environment, the living nature, in the nature, everything is highly optimized. Because in the living things, the material is expensive and shape is free. That's why, for example, our bones are having density only in places where you have very high stress. The other parts are as light as possible. And the same applies to almost any living thing in the world, because it requires a lot of material and energy to build those body parts. When we think about the construction, traditionally, the material is cheap and the shape is expensive. And that's why we have quite a lot of very dull environments. Because if you want to make cheap, you usually make it very simple. And of course, simple can be beautiful as well, but very often it's really not so much so. So this less is more is very often really less is more, as they have been translating this very famous architectural statement from Mies van der Rohe. But when you start thinking about these new production methods, it can change. At the moment, of course, we can make very complex buildings, but these are very expensive buildings. And only when the client is ready to pay some significant amount of extra for the buildings, you can do something like this. But when we think about these new technologies, it might change. It might be that in the future, really the material is expensive and the shape is free. And that can be leading very much, I would say, increasing the degree of freedom in the form giving of the buildings. It's not happening immediately, but I think that this is something we should be thinking in the architectural education. So it might be that not only the design, but also the construction methods will be very different in relatively near future. So I think the basic skill that we have to give to our students is the ability to adapt to the changes, because that will be continuing. Whatever we have now will be changing. And I think that we are in a way this evolutionary situation that those who want to survive, they have to be able to adapt to the changes. Thank you.